This podcast is made possible by you, the supporters of WPLN and WNXP, Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's April 20th, 2026. And I'm not going to lie, it feels a little wrong to be the person at WPLN telling you the story that I'm going to tell you today. Because back when it happened, starting on this day in 2012, and developing bit by bit for the next few years, my boss, news director Tony Gonzalez, covered the story for the Tennessean. He was the first one in town to put the pieces together. And let me tell you, what he found was a story and a half. But I'll do my best to do him proud. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Our story starts on a Friday night, right around midnight. The man piloting a small plane over Nashville used the lights around Opryland as a guide to find his way to an old airfield he'd used plenty of times before. But as he descended towards the runway, the landing gear didn't deploy. The pilot managed the situation with skill, aiming for the grass just beside the surface, controlling the angle of the aircraft as it hit the ground, making it slide on its belly so softly that it didn't trigger a crash locator beacon even as it traveled 0.2 of a mile before stopping. He called his wife, who was at their home in Dixon County. She picked him up. They left the airplane behind. Now, one thing to understand about the airfield is that it wasn't supposed to be used by planes anymore. When it was operating, the Cornelia Ford Air Park in East Nashville was a privately owned facility. For about 60 years or so, it was a place folks could land light aircraft, like the one in our story. You know, the kind of planes that only hold a few people at most. The property was on the banks of the Cumberland River, with the runway situated parallel to the water. It flooded badly in 2010, and that was pretty much the end of the air park. It officially closed in 2011. The city brought the property to be an extension of the Shelby Park Greenway. The runway was painted with giant yellow X's, a signal to pilots saying, "Don't land here." And that was the state of things on April 20th, 2012. So you can imagine the surprise the next morning when a Parks Department employee spotted a shiny, silver, twin-engine Beechcraft in the grass. The worker didn't call the police right away, but when the plane was still in the same spot the next day, law enforcement was brought in. A press release issued at the time by MNPD and the FAA says they examined the plane and didn't find any kind of cargo or contraband on board. There wasn't any sign of injury. They noted that the pilot hadn't been in contact with Nashville's air traffic control tower. But they did say they had reason to believe the pilot may have previously housed the aircraft at Cornelia Fort. And most importantly, they said they didn't know whose plane it was, but were hoping someone in the community could provide more information. Well, as it turns out, it was a very recognizable plane. And in fact, by the time the press release was circulated identifying the plane's owner, our own Tony Gonzalez had already identified that the pilot who crash landed and walked away must have been Russell Brothers. And Tony had actually already interviewed him for the Tennessean. Yes, Brothers had frequented Cornelia Fort Air Park through the years. Except, of course, for the 11 years he spent in prison. You see, Russell Brothers was a Nashville native who grew up in Belmead and went to Montgomery Bell Academy. He was offered a football scholarship to Vanderbilt. But instead of making a career in medicine or banking or law, he became an international drug smuggler. In 1988, he was found guilty of sneaking 1.5 tons of cocaine into the United States. At the time, he owned a small fleet of air and watercraft, which he used to pick up the drugs in South America, fly them to the Bahamas, get the cocaine into Florida on boats, and then drive it here to Nashville, where he'd meet up with people who then took the cocaine to Canada. At least these are the details we've heard from prosecutors. All of those vehicles were taken in what was, at the time, the biggest seizure in Florida history. His sentence was actually much longer than the time he ended up serving. The judge wanted him to stay in prison for 60 years. In 1992, while he was in prison, prosecutors filed more charges against Brothers. This time, he ended up striking a deal to tell what he knew about another smuggler. And that's how he ended up getting out of prison after just under a dozen years. He stayed out of the attention of law enforcement for more than a decade. But in 2010, he was charged with stealing someone else's airplane from John C. Toon Airport on the west side of Nashville. But back to 2012. Less than a week after the crash landing, Brothers' home in Burns was searched. Authorities say they found 16 firearms, revolvers, rifles, a shotgun, and they said he'd given other guns to friends and asked one of them to lie to investigators. Given his prior conviction, Brothers didn't have the legal right to own a single one of those guns. And so in 2014, Russell Brothers, by this time a 77-year-old man, agreed to plead guilty to felony gun charges. Under the terms of his deal with prosecutors, he was sentenced to 15 more months in prison. Brothers said he knew that if he tried to fight the charges, he could have ended up dying in prison. Instead, the man who said he'd found God and turned his life around during his first go at serving time said he would keep his head down, read, and study until he was freed again. Tony's reporting from the Times says Brothers tried to donate the shiny silver airplane for display in the park where he crash landed it, but Metro wasn't interested in keeping that souvenir. In just a few minutes, saving one of Tennessee's endangered habitats. That's coming up after the newscast.
Tennessee's legislature has passed a record-breaking number of anti-LGBTQ laws. I'm Mariana Baca-Yao, and as WPLN's Power and Equity reporter, I focus not only on how marginalized communities contend with those new laws, but how they come together in spite of them.
I think what gives me hope is that someone like you is covering this. Because if the overwhelming narrative is one of defeat, how can we have hope?
Listen here on 90.3 WPLN News.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Nearly 3 months on, city and state agencies are still seeking to support folks affected by Winter Storm Fern. Earlier this month, FEMA approved more disaster relief, including individual cash assistance. That federal approval comes 72 days after the state requested it. Kristen Coulter with the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency says this assistance is just one piece of the puzzle. TEMA will soon open a disaster recovery center in Nashville where residents can apply for federal support. There's also support from the Metro Action Commission, which provided nearly $500,000 in housing assistance after the storm. Now, the commission plans to reopen the application portal on April 27th for residents still struggling with the ice storm's impact. Those eligible now include people making up to around $80,000 or families that make $114,000. Nashville Electric Service wasn't ready when the storm knocked out power to nearly half of NES customers. In fact, the utility's emergency plan had only looked at impacts of up to 50,000 customers. The deadly ice storm left more than 4 times that many without electricity. That's one finding of an independent consultant's initial review released last week. The report also says NES's response plan lacked detail, scalability, and guidance. There were issues with its incident command structure that led to communications problems, and its systems struggled to estimate how much help NES needed or the time to restore power, a process that ultimately took 16 days. The report, based on NES data, documents, and staff interviews, is not final. It's also separate from a commission former Governor Phil Bredesen is chairing to review how NES handled the ice storm. Going forward, the report recommends stepping up the utility's emergency response planning, training, and exercises. It also suggests administrators update incident command and storm communications plans. NES says it's already working on improvements. Millions of people observe Pride Month in June. That's to commemorate the 1969 Stonewall riots, which were a major turning point in the fight for LGBTQ rights. But Tennessee lawmakers want June to celebrate something else, and have passed a joint resolution declaring June is now Nuclear Family Month. The Tennessean reports Governor Bill Lee signed off on the measure. It reads in part, the nuclear family consisting of one husband, one wife, and any biological, adopted, or fostered children is God's design for familial structure. It says the nuclear family is under attack. A spokesperson for GLAAD, formerly the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, gave a statement to the LGBTQ news site The Advocate. It says family comes in many forms, and lawmakers should focus on making Tennessee more welcoming for all. A Metro Nashville council member is getting conflict of interest accusations because of her votes on East Bank development. 2 Nashvillians filed an ethics complaint against Courtney Johnston. The complaints say Johnston failed to report she was on the board for the Music City Children's Museum. That's one of the organizations vying for a spot on the East Bank. The complaint notes Johnston has been participating in zoning votes on a patch of land that the museum is eyeing. Johnston declined a Nashville Banner request for comment in a phone call, saying the complaint was nonsense. Yesterday marked the 66th anniversary of an important civil rights march from North Nashville to the Davidson County Courthouse. The original march, led in part by 22-year-old Diane Nash, was a response to the bombing of the home of civil rights attorney Z. Alexander Luby. More than 3,000 protesters marched in silence that day to confront Mayor Ben West. And this weekend, others silently followed in their footsteps. But now the march ends at a plaza that bears Diane Nash's name. In an archival interview with NBC News, Nash said the idea to march in silence came to the leaders spontaneously.
And we walked, we held our heads high because we were right. And we knew we were walking for something right. We were really striding toward freedom. It was a wonderful feeling. It was magnificent. We felt unity, we felt power, we felt strength.
Nash's confrontation led the mayor to publicly acknowledge that segregation was immoral, which is a crucial step towards desegregation in Nashville and beyond. This is the fourth year that the city has held a commemorative march. Nashvillians lined up at Centennial Park over the weekend to take home free trees. Madison Williams, with the nonprofit Nashville Tree Foundation, helped to give out 1,500 saplings as part of a celebration of Earth Day.
Nashville's urban canopy was damaged pretty heavily from the storm, so this giveaway feels a bit more special. It's just more meaningful, more impactful, because we do need to nurse Nashville's canopy back to a healthy state.
Thousands of trees were damaged or destroyed in the ice storm at the end of January. Williams says these new white oaks, Carolina silverbells, serviceberries, and other trees will help to restore the region's canopy. The unofficial mayor of East Nashville, Todd Snyder, passed away in November. As a folk musician and storyteller, he was outspoken in his love of community. Memorial flowers still adorn the doorway to his studio, named the Purple Building, in 5 Points. And as music and culture reporter Justin Barney reports, today is officially Todd Snyder Day.
The call came from inside the house. Today's proclamation started with a phone call to the mayor on WPLN's This Is Nashville.
Bill, you're on with the mayor. Go ahead.
Hey, Mayor O'Connell. This is Bill from East Nashville. And I'm just curious if you solely have the authority to declare April 20th Todd Snyder Day, or if that's something we're going to have to take to ballot.
No, man, what a great suggestion. I will take it back to our office and see if we can get a proclamation done up.
Bill put in an official petition, and the mayor's office got to work. I followed up with Bill Conran outside of Frothy Monkey in East Nashville. How do you think that Todd Snyder would want people to celebrate?
I'm not sure he would really appreciate having an official proclamation to him because he's quite a rebel. But at the same point, I think he'd want us to gather in community and share stories and spread love.
She said life isn't easy getting through. Everybody's gonna make things tough on you. But I can tell you right now, if you dig what you do, they will never get you down. She said life's too short to worry.
There will be a free Todd Snyder celebration tonight at Vinyl Tap in East Nashville. People will play Todd Snyder records, sell old merch, and surely tell some stories.
You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org.
Grassland habitats across the United States have been on a sharp decline over the past 30 years, with some researchers suggesting that millions of acres are lost on average each year. Will Darnell with member station WKMS visited a Clarksville group hoping to halt the loss of southern grasslands.
Volunteers with Austin Peay State University's Southeastern Grasslands Institute are hard at work cleaning, sifting, and scraping unwanted protective leaves or chaff off a collection of local seeds. These seeds will play a vital role in SGI's mission to preserve native plant life and revitalize grasslands across the South.
Our goal, whenever we collect seed, is for it to go back out into the environment as soon as possible. We're not so much trying to just hold on to things or collect for the sake of collecting. We want to actually use them.
That's Gus Rasich, the organization's Native Seed Collections Program Manager. It's his job to identify, collect, and preserve seeds of plant species native to the region, and to work with volunteers like Darla Adams to help achieve those ends. Adams has volunteered with SGI for about 4 years because she thinks it's critical to care for regional environments.
To me, it's unbelievably important because so many of us don't realize how everything depends on everything else in nature.
Adams isn't the only one who believes. With funds sourced from private donations and grants recently awarded to the group, SGI announced in late February that it's embarking on a $10 million project focused on restoring native Tennessee plants across nearly 2,500 acres of grasslands. Volunteers are a big part of SGI's plans for the project, with people like Adams helping to contribute to nearly every stage of the land revitalization process, starting with the collection of native seeds from surrounding areas.
Then those seeds are cleaned and stored for future in case who knows what might happen to the environment. We may lose them, and then we go out and we actually pull up invasive species in the prairies.
A few miles away from the team of seed cleaners, Laura Hunt, a volunteer coordinator with SGI, leads another group helping to clear invasive plants along a trail that runs through a dry field in Dunbar Cave State Park. She pauses for a moment as she walks the trail, pulling out a small saw to cut a chunk of vine crawling up the side of a tree.
See it? Yeah. That's winter creeper.
After showing the volunteers what she's talking about, she applies a blue solution to the tree meant to halt the growth of the invasive plant. If left unchecked, the winter creeper would have outcompeted native species because of how big and fast it grows. Hunt says these preemptive measures are being taken in the hopes that they'll give the native seeds previously planted by SGI a chance to thrive in the local grassland.
So it's out of a sense of futility that we do this, and it means everything to me when this many people show up to participate because they're getting the experience. They'll know it the rest of their life.
The volunteer coordinator says that these first-hand experiences with plant identification and removal, along with the feelings that come from spending time working in nature, often leave participants with a feeling of accomplishment.
The adult volunteers that cut down that whole 30 pine trees or more in that area, they know how they're helping conservation. It's just a good feeling for everybody.
SGI has active projects to reduce the loss of grassland biodiversity across central Tennessee and as far away as Oklahoma and Virginia. I'm Will Darnell in Clarksville.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. Thanks so much to all of you who've left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. That little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.